This is the PC GOG version of Ys VIII. I do have the original costume here. I used that DLC, but I didn't use the rest that came with it because there's another costume as well, but I don't have that character yet. But the rest of the DLC it's really just cheat codes because it's like an additional bottle, more items, crafting items, just that sort of thing to speed you up on the progression chart there. But the main reason I'm making this here, like I've already played this on the PS4, and I figured when they released it for PC it was going to be the same thing with maybe better shadowing and SSAO, and they put in a few extra, you know, options like that. I'm not playing with the anti-aliasing here because the method they allow is FXAA, which just makes the image blurry. However, there is still a bit of a shimmer on the screen, and if you set all the graphic settings to off, the shimmer is reduced. The main one, there's a one that I think it's called Load Assets or something like that. It puts more of the ground terrain on, and I'm using that here because it makes the shimmer more apparent. Or the foliage rather, it puts more of that around. But with it off, there's less shimmer, so I think most of the shimmer comes down to something with the art. It's weird because it's on when I was playing on the PS4, I thought for sure it was from the anti-aliasing method. I was like, well, when it goes on PC, that'll be solved, but no, even with AA off and all the other features off, the game still has shimmer. But I wasn't really that interested in this because, in the PC version, I mean, because I was like, well, you know, I've already played it. They can't really do much wrong, because if they port it over, even if it's like worst case scenario from my mind, I was like, worst case scenario, it'll just be, it's not really that optimized, so it's brute forcing to lock at 60 FPS, as opposed to even the PS4 Pro. It didn't have a 60 FPS lock. It would frequently dive to around what would feel like around the 45 frame per second mark. But this does have some issues, but I decided to check it out because I saw it was getting such a negative reception. I was like, man, they must have really messed it up, so I decided to give it a look. And it seems to be really blown out of proportion because, yes, it's not, the quality isn't ideal, and there's going to be patches on the way soon to resolve some of the issues. But for example, I was hearing about frequent crashing, and I've only had one crash, and it occurred during, I was in one of the caves, and I was doing a screen transition, and one of those loading screen transitions, and it crashed. And at first I was like, oh, there it is. But then I loaded the game back up, and you can skip the intro logos, so that's, you know, that's time saved. And then it auto-saves. When you have autosave on, it auto-saves during every screen transition. There's other points as well, but it auto-saves there too. So I just loaded up, and it auto-saved from where it would have put me after the crash, you know, after the load screen. So I was like, well, it crashed, but this is after, that's after or during 3 hours of gameplay. And it's like 5 seconds of life lost, right? Because I just relaunched the game, mashed through the intros, spam A to quick load the slot, and I'm right back to it. Another complaint was frame rate loss, and I haven't had this significant version that other people have had, but there's a couple ways I've read to fix it. The first one is what I did. I didn't have frame loss specifically because you'll see the game during loading screens, it locks to 30 frames per second, which, like, that's fine with me because loading screen is just text, and if it locks to 30 instead of 60 or caps at 30 instead of 60, that means that's that little less extra stress on the graphics card, because for example, if it left it at 60, you don't need 60. So it's actually smart for them to drop it when you don't need it, because it's less tax. And then otherwise it's locked at 60, and I say it's locked, but there's some hitching, and I think some of the hitching is from when the game engine is stream loading. Like, you'll be running through a larger area and it'll like have this quick little stutter. and the frame rate will still like say locked 60, but it clearly has a bit of a hitch, and that could be due to just the stream loading used. Because something to keep in mind here with this game is that it's at the core it's a PS Vita game, and because even on the PlayStation version it's a Vita game at the core, and if you look at the graphics here, it's clearly like the textures and the water like it's not even a home console game. It was made for the Vita, and everything that's it's been ported to since has just been it's getting ported over to that. It's not being you know, vastly upgraded. It's not, for example, it's not like they made this for the PS4 and then had a downgraded Vita version where like the textures were way lower, or like they did the PC version first and then downgraded and started with the lower ones first to milk some sales. The double dipping some people do. So they started with the Vita, and then the other versions just kind of came as mostly resolution bump versions, because again, even this game with the additional graphic settings turned on that the PC has, it doesn't even make it look that much better. So when I'm actually playing, like in the video I have them on, but when I'm actually playing I turn most of them off. Like even in this video I have depth of field off because I've never liked depth of field, lens flares off, but I play with all of that stuff off. It's really just I have VSync and 1920 by 1080. But so one of the things with the hitching, I think, is a stream load thing from it being made for, you know, like the engine being too big for the Vita hardware, perhaps, and then they never bothered to touch up the engine to stream load better on better hardware. It's just okay. So like that optimization isn't there. But if you look at the usage in the upper left here, it's barely, and it makes sense. It should be barely making a dent in my system hardware. I'm using an i7 7700K, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. It's installed to a SSD with over 100 gigs of free space, and it's a GTX 1070, 8 gigabyte. I had to think for a second there, because I was like, how much memory does it have? It's 8 gigabytes. So there's a lot of room, and it's interesting as well because the store page, like it doesn't seem like the store page requirements are near, like it seems like they're overshooting, potentially just for safety. But yeah, so part of it's the stream loading, I think. The other thing too is the in-game VSync doesn't actually work right now. If you have it on, you're still going to get screen tearing. So what I did was I went to the GPU control panel for my NVIDIA card, and I set it to force VSync on for this program, and then the screen tearing went away, and then it also had the side effect of removing a lot of the hitching. So that solved a lot of the frame rate issues I was having. Another one that's causing problems for people seems to be with, and this seems to be specific to the Steam version, something with Steam's controller detection having a conflict with the game's controller detection, is I've read about people who are playing mouse and keyboard and they were having really choppy frame rates, and then they plugged in a gamepad, but then they just played with mouse and keyboard and the frame rate went up. There's also been a post by the developer about making some changes to the Steam controller options to potentially get this to run smoother. So I didn't have either of those issues. Like once I got the VSync thing forced on, like I was like, wow, this runs way better than the PS4 Pro version. The problem with the PS4 Pro version is it ran at 4K, and you didn't have the option. This is the case with a lot of PlayStation 4 games. I was on the PS4 Pro and I was like, well, I'd like to be able to play at just 1920 by 1080 and have the performance better. But the issue with a Pro is it says, well, you're on a Pro, and Pros can do 4K. So if the game detects you're on a Pro you don't have the cap for the resolution through the system set lower, it just goes 4K and you're stuck with it. And this game did that too. So on the Pro, even if I capped it at 1920 by 1080, what it would do was the game would go, oh, the system is capped at 1920 by 1080, therefore it's not a Pro machine. And so it would still, like, even though the resolution was lower, it ended up actually running worse than if I had it at the 4K, because it was giving me like the base PS4 experience. And I noticed the same thing with Destiny 2 when I played that for a bit on the PS4 Pro. Like, that's a bit of an aside to this. It's just weird that the PS4 Pro, like if you cap the resolution lower, it just makes it go, okay, this system is saying it doesn't go up to 4K because the user is capped it at a lower resolution. This game supports 4K. Since we can't hit that on this system, it must not be a Pro, so perform worse. You know, everything. It was really bizarre. But because I've read, you know, to me, if this was a bad port, it would be crashing a lot. The controls would be bad. The optimization, like the usage, would be way higher, because it would be like, you know, a dump and run. But like I'm saying, if you look at the usage, like that's, like I'm looking at my CPU right now. I'm not sure what it's going to say, but the highest I'm seeing is 19%, and most of them are lower than that. And it's using all the cores as well, not just, it's not ones at like 60 and the rest are at 0. So to me, as far as performance goes, there's the minor hitches that need to be fixed. And yes, you know, it's frustrating to have to go outside of the program, and like I'd understand people giving the game a negative review because they're like, it has problems, but you can fix them and then it works. But what was weird to me is I've seen games like Skyrim, for example, when that launched, that has had way better user reception despite having way more problems on launch, and it took Bethesda a long time to fix them. And like, this is the problems this is having. And even like BioWare games too, like I remember Mass Effect 2, like that game crashed on me every 45-15 minutes during the first week it was out. And people are giving it bad reviews for other reasons. And I've seen Steam games that they just, like what I've mentioned, it's like they have problems, like worse tech problems, but people like overlook them because of the game. And the tech problems I had here, I'm like, well, the VSync thing, that can be fixed easily. If someone's having a crash problem, it's hard to say, because it's like, is it their driver issue? Not everyone's sharing their specs, so are they up to the specs, or are they not? And then they're just blaming the game because they don't want to be like, I need to get new hardware, because that happens. I've heard about audio issues. I haven't had any. The developers have acknowledged this as well, though they're saying there's some audio issues they're going to be fixing. So I guess there's something. So you know, I'm not saying nobody's having these issues, but it's like, how bad are they? Because that's what the weird thing. Looking at the reception, you wouldn't think it'd be able to play like it does, like what you're seeing. And the reason I made another video is because people were like, oh, you made a 10-minute video, but you didn't get very deep. So like, here I am. This is about 3 hours in. I've been running around a bit farming and stuff to, you know, pad it, and there is this is almost to chapter 3. I just have one more mission to do, and then I believe it's one more main mission, and then it's chapter 3. But yeah, I had the one crash, which wasn't a big issue. Like, it sucks and they should fix it, but it wasn't like, you know, if I was reviewing this, I'd still give it a recommended, because it's, in my mind, the original, the PS4 Pro version, was a 7 out of 10. And this game, because the performance is better, like it runs a lot smoother, and it's got these other issues, I'd still give it a 7 out of 10. Because like for me, it took me less than a minute to fix it. So just go force VSync on, hop back in. Oh, it's working. Perfect. And then the one crash. And aside from that, there's 2 of the cave areas early on. There's the one from when you're running about before you get the camp completely. And then there's later on where you fight the spider boss. Those 2 caves, they have some light flicker, which it's annoying, but they're gonna fix it. Like, I can guess what's causing it, but it can be a few things. But it's gonna be an easy fix, I'm sure. And as far as I know, that's not something you can fix user end. Another thing people were having issues with was the internal resolution is either locked to 4K for some people or locked to a lower one, and there's no option to change it. But there's a runtime command you can set for at least 4K. If you go to your shortcut and at the end of the target line put /4K, it makes it do the internal resolution at 4K. But if you're having performance issues because of your hardware and it's at 4K internal, getting it to do the lower resolutions internally, you need a hex editor. There's a post on it, but hopefully that'll be patched in as an option in the game for texture resolution. or something along those lines for the terminology, because right now there's nothing to say like low, medium, high, which is what it ends up coming down to. Like obviously 4K is going to be the high option. But even at 4K, this game's not very pretty. Like you should be able to tell by looking at it, this is a handheld game that's getting ported about to better hardware. The price, I think the price is, like if anyone's going to complain about anything, I thought that would have been the big thing, because it is just, it's a Vita game. It was my big complaint about the PS4 version as well, because I'm like, they're taking, it's like they were taxing people. So like the Vita version, I think it cost $10 less, and the PS4 Pro version, or even just the PS4 version, it had the higher resolution and it ran better, but that's from the hardware. So it's like they were charging people a $10 tax for using better hardware, which didn't make any sense. And then this one, it's the same thing. Like the PS4 version's been discounted, like it's dropped in price. So is the Vita version. It's not adding new content. The performance is better, but that's again from the hardware. The graphical options you can add on, like it's not like there's like it's not like the texture's got like a huge bump. Like it's the same game. Like it shouldn't be priced like it was brand new. I had the same beef with Final Fantasy XII on PC. It was like the PS4 version's $40 Canadian. This is coming out at $67, and it's the same thing. There's nothing new about it. Like it's the same game. Like, and it's not like the PC has a bunch of additional features. It's just the same game. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about the port here, because that was the main reason for this. I'm not really talking about the game. I'll put a link to my brief review I had on the original version from when I played that. I do skip the cutscenes because the story it's not that great. Like, I don't even want to say it has moments, because it really doesn't. Like it's a really bland story. I was glad you could skip. You can't skip all the cutscenes, but you can skip, I'd say, like 99% of them. There's a ton of dialogue, but it's the kind of dialogue where they're saying things, but nothing's happening, or they're saying things, but it's not really any character development or anything interesting or insightful. It's just words for the sake of, being like, our game has X amount of words in it. Like it's a higher number when it could have been lower and more to the point. I mean, maybe some people like having that excessive load of dialogue to chew through because it makes it feel more epic, but when there isn't a lot going on, what's the point? The character models, again, because this is all from a Vita game, like, so it's... Like, I'm not praising it for the low hardware dent, beyond it meaning that it's not like a bad dump and run, but the hardware dent being so low, it makes sense because it's also dated. It's also dated. Like this is like it doesn't even look like a PS3 game, like an HD PS3 game. It looks somewhere between a PS2 and PS3 game. But then it's the size is pretty substantial. Like it's 20-something gigabytes when installed. But I think most of that's going to be the audio. Like I'm going to assume that's what it is. I'm going to say it's uncompressed. Like voice files and music. And the music in this game, to me, is really the only thing that's like true to the Ys formula, because otherwise this plays more like the action's more like Dynasty Warriors. Yeah, you can put it on a higher difficulty to make it more of a grind fest, as far as like because it would make it so every enemy is essentially a bullet sponge if your gear is not there. But there's a new game plus, so I think what most people are going to do if they want to play on Inferno is they're just going to breeze through the game on a lower difficulty to get their stats up and stuff, and then switch over to the new game plus mode after beating it and go on Inferno, and they'll have a souped up characters to make that a lot easier. Because if you play it on that off the bat, I'm not going to say nobody can do it, right? Because I'm sure somebody could. It's going to be a really tedious game. And even on the lower difficulties, the game can be a little tedious sometimes because you got to farm, and it can be a little repetitive, and there's some RNG with the drops. Like, to me, it doesn't really feel like an Ys game, and part of that is due to the party system. I preferred when it was just, you're the one guy and you're running about. And that's why Oath and Felghana was my favorite, like for other reasons as well. But it's compared to this, I'm like, this is not, it's not on that same level of quality. But from my perspective, like, as you can see, like, what issues are there here? Like, and there's got to be a lot of people that are playing the game, and this is the experience they're having, and for some reason they're not leaving, like, because they could be playing the good old games version, or they could be playing the Steam version. They just don't want to leave a positive review and get attacked by people that are having bad experiences. Because I made a post on this. The reason I say that is I made a post on the Steam forum with that 10-minute or 11-minute video showing here it's working. And then I started looking into, like, I was like, why is it working for me and not other people? Then I started, you know, presenting with the options I've given in this video, which is try forcing VSync on, try turning off graphic options, update your, you know, your video and audio drivers, make sure Windows 10 is up to date, or, you know, and if you're not on Windows 10, maybe get on Windows 10, because the other interesting thing too is Windows 7 is listed under the minimum specs, but for recommended, it's Windows 8.1 and Windows 10. Like, they don't put Windows 7 there. To me, if it was fully supported on Windows 7, it would be recommended on, like, one of the recommended specs would still say Windows 7. Like, why would it matter? So I'm thinking maybe they didn't do as much testing on Windows 7 as they did on Windows 10, or what they did do for play testing on Windows 7. Maybe it just had more issues compared to Windows 10, which is why I went under the recommended side for it doesn't say Windows 7. Because I know it might sound weird for me to be saying that, but I don't know why else they would drop that OS from that side. Like, don't use Windows 7 ideally. Use something newer. But yeah, so I made those suggestions, and it just turned into a big troll thing. So it's like there's a bunch of people that are angry, and it makes sense. I get it. You know, the game's been delayed, and then it comes out, and it's not 100% perfect. But I'd say, as far as the port quality goes, it's like 90% there. So it's almost there. I was expecting, I was like, well, it would make sense with the bitterness. I would think like mixed, or like, you know, the first positive ranking that happens above mixed. And that's where I would think the game would sit generally, given the quality of it as an Ys title, but also as a standalone title. If you put all that aside, like, it's, you know, like a 7, I would think. So I was very surprised. But as you can see, because I'm not making this up, if you look, like, it's playing fine. Like, this is going to be 23 minutes, and yeah, like, I don't get it. But yeah, Ys VIII, it's on PC. You might have to spend, literally, like, if it causes issues, you might have to spend a minute doing some things to get it to work, or some other things that you should be on top of anyway with your hardware, like the updates and whatnot. And if it doesn't, you know, that it doesn't, but I'd recommend giving it a shot if you were interested and you were not doing it because of the reviews, because you can get it working, and it doesn't take a lot. And if it doesn't, just hit the refund and be like, well, this guy, like, he's a unicorn, but I don't think I'm a unicorn, because I've played games before that had a lot of issues, and a lot of people were having issues, and nobody could figure it out, and it was all developer end. And it was working for me. I found out some things about why it was, and I shared that, and I'm showing that here. This works, you know. Again, not 100%, and it's still, like, it's got the 8-way movement instead of the 360 movement, but the way the game works, it's the 8-way movement. It's janky because the animation, like, it goes from, like, if you go forward to diagonal, the character just, like, jerks into that direction. It's not like this smooth animation, but they'll probably fix that. So I don't know what to say. It was really weird. Like, I know I said this a few times, but it was really weird seeing the response, like the reception, because I was like, it's not nearly as bad as other games that have deserved, because it's literally been broken. This is not broken.